Welcome to NovoEDTalks, a podcast for authentic, honest conversations about talent development and the people shaping it. On this show, we sit down with leaders across learning and development, mentorship, leadership development, HR, and people strategy to talk about what's really working, what's changing, and what they're learning along the way. These aren't surface-level interviews. They're candid conversations about building skills, developing leaders, supporting managers, and creating experiences that actually move organizations forward. Before we jump in, a quick word about NovoED. Founded at Stanford's Social Algorithms Lab in 2012, NovoED is a people-centric talent development platform built for enterprises and training providers. Business transformation starts with people, and people perform better on NovoED. In today's fast-changing landscape, upskilling requires a new approach. NovoED makes it easy to move beyond the talent development status quo by combing social, collaborative, cohort-based learning with real-world application. The result is future-ready talent built on a platform designed to turn learning into measurable impact. Now, let's meet our guests for today's NovoEDTalks episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the NovoEDTalks podcast, a space for talent development trailblazers to get real. My name is Melissa Fisk, and I'm the producer of the NovoEDTalks podcast. And today I'm joined by Stephen Vellecca, leading the strategy, design, and delivery of leadership and talent development programs across the organization. His work focuses on building leadership capability, accelerating talent growth, and creating learning experiences that drive business results and organizational culture. Stephen, it's a pleasure to have you here today. Welcome to the NovoEDTalks podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, why don't you start by just kind of talking a little bit more about your role, the scope of learning and development work that you're doing, and kind of what your day-to-day is like.
Sure. I think the best way to sum that up is focusing on people leader capabilities and continuing to evolve how leaders inspire their teams to drive results and in a ever-changing environment where we're constantly looking at standards and raising standards and moving standards forward. It really just ensuring that we provide our leaders with the development that they need to drive performance.
I love that. So who are some of the learners that you're supporting? Is it mostly like a leadership team, managers, and maybe talk to a little bit about what their pressures or challenges are that they're currently facing?
So I'm responsible for all of our leaders across, so all different levels. And I think that's where the opportunity comes in to determine how education programs support different levels of responsibility. And it varies from leaders that are focused on very large frontline colleague teams to senior leadership that lead leaders, and really everything in between. These standards are the same. How they are deployed, though, between a frontline colleague. So if you are leading, like a store leader who's leading 25 to 40 frontline colleagues, how they nuance the standards, how they execute the standards will be a little bit different than how a corporate leader who's leading leaders might do it, which is a little bit more strategy focused. So yes, it's definitely a conscious effort to ensure the content can be applicable across different leadership levels.
Stephen, if you picture the ideal state of learning or talent development at your organization, what does that actually look like in practice?
Well, I am still a proponent of in-person learning, but understanding that any type of in-person experience is a very small percentage of the skill being adapted and developed. So the learning in a classroom environment versus virtual, and I do both, and especially since the way we had to shift into pandemic world, and then we went 100% virtual for learning, and now we have a balance. I don't think anything really replaces the in-person experience. we like to say, or I like to say, training isn't a silver bullet. And I think sometimes people will reach out and say, we need more training on this, or we're going to roll out that and we need training, and expect miracles to happen. When development provides context around a skill, practice around a skill, competencies around a skill, the majority happens though after the class, and how their people leaders are involved in the learning, and how it's really being surrounded back on the role. My other comment is policy doesn't replace leadership. So sometimes we'll say, you see out in industries where like they'll create a policy and hoping for behavioral change versus the leader having the feedback conversation. Policy won't fix behavioral issues.
I think sometimes there is a disconnect there, though, between departments.
The leadership piece is always going to be meeting people where they are, in a sense of finding what motivates them and inspires them. And that's really the role of a leader. It's funny. If people become a leader, I always say, if you want to be a leader, there has to be something in you that feels motivated and feels a certain sense of gratitude or accomplishment by what your team does. If you're stepping into a leader role because you want to be the boss and it's your way and now you have control, it's going to be an epic failure. So there's a big difference between being an individual contributor who is just focused on what they do. They're part of a team, but they're only responsible for that themselves. But at the end of the day, a leader really has to know why they're doing this.
Where do you feel there's still kind of the biggest gap between this ideal state and where you're operating today?
I think it's still a combination. I think depending on the industry you're in, there's always going to be challenges in retail, geographic locations. And I also have to adapt to anyone that's in the retail side of the business. Corporate office, you're there Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. You're not customer facing. I can pull them into a training for an hour at any time based on, what's happening in the office and stuff. You have a lot more challenges with the store environment because we're open. And the majority of the time, a leader has to be on the floor with their team and be customer facing. So I think in retail, we continue to look at what are the best ways of if we're doing something in person, it has to be very valuable. And it really must surround our strategy to drive our business. And are there supplemental, and this is where we have an opportunity right now, is still looking at how do we provide a let's say a developmental session that could be in person for an hour or 90 minutes, but then how is it supplemented by micro learnings, whether it's on their phone, whether it's so those are the opportunities we have to keep things alive and figure out more creative ways of learning. I joke around that I want to figure out what's the TikTok version of what I do. So it's fun and it's engaging. But that to me is captivating. So we've played around with certain little video clips where we're like, get ready with me for talent review, or do this or do that. And so I think that's the space that we're going to continue to move into. And I think the more we can make learning always business driving, so that if I am focused on, if I'm pulling you away from what your day-to-day is, you are going to benefit and you're going to immediately apply a skill we just focused on and hopefully see a direct impact. The more we could also make it engaging and fun, that people look forward to it, is also the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say making it fun, because when you said that just there, I'm like, oh, I want to see that just because that's hilarious. It would be fun, and like it's something that, yeah, like you want people to be like, okay, like I got to do this, whatever, but like I'm gonna have fun doing it, and that's great. Obviously, keeping the business driving component of it there and at the forefront is important, yes, but that's awesome. How are you, you just gave us a great little anecdotal example, but in general, how are you designing learning experiences to ensure that the learning like actually sticks, beyond just attendance or completion, that people are engaged and taking it away?
I think there's been quite the move towards impact. Learning and development has it's funny. I think learning and development go ebbs and flows. I think there have been moments in my career, pre-pandemic, where learning and development might have been one of the, and I'm not speaking on behalf of Bloomingdale's, right? We align, right? But just in general in the industry, I think learning and development ebbs and flows, and it becomes a real popular moment, and then it's one of the first to go when budget cuts come. And we saw a huge boom in learning and development during the pandemic and post-pandemic. And a lot of the how you show up was just as important, and the merging of personal and professional versus leave your problems at the door, and cultural, political unrest. I mean, so much came into what a leader was now navigating, especially a leader working with the public. It was a perfect storm of politics, cultural, fear, everything. So learning and development had a boom. And it was really funny. I've never been more recruited in my life, where like I just kept getting this. We're launching a new L&D program, this, that, and the other. Like now I think it's settled down again, and we really are focused on the KPIs of learning and development and how can we measure it, because it is hard to measure a soft skill, and you're not going to see an immediate bump in certain metrics, let's say. So I think it's a bit of a long-term look. So there's the typical measurements of if we drive leaders' capability, that should impact the business. It should impact turnover. It should impact engagement when we measure engagement. So those are your all basic metrics. It's for me where I'm really trying to think about is how do we measure where we are currently, let's say at a baseline, and then where would we be after the investment in a particular developmental program, and see if there is a mark. It's just figuring out how to quantify that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of my next question. You hit on a couple of those metrics, but what are the signals that tell you that learners are truly engaged? You talked about like turnover rates and engagement rates and things like that. But is there anything you look for kind of like anecdotally? I like to ask this question because people tend to have things that they look for anecdotally. That's like, okay, yes, I can say that this program was successful. And it's not, unfortunately, sometimes it isn't necessarily as easily quantifiable as like we want it to be.
I think there's a couple things. I think I try to never term something as a program, even though I may have said that before, because a program means it's a specific moment in time. And if we can shift how we create it and how people receive it as more of a standard, and providing skills to deliver the standard, it tends to be more sticky versus I'm going to go to this class, it's a moment in time. And so I think there's a surround with a standard. Then how I tend to believe whether something is successful or not is how it starts to permeate in the culture, where we all start to speak the same language. And if I start to see senior leadership using some of the terminology that we're presenting in the developmental sessions, and using it as a filter, let's say, when working with their teams and they're asking the questions saying, well, how will this initiative, let's say, develop talent? Or how will this, so you start to see it become part of the culture, part of our speak. And then my dream is that how we develop starts to become part of the culture of advancement. And we start to look at, other than driving results, the how versus the what. And can we see the how, and this is to me also, again, in my personal life or in life in general, I think people that take a celebrity who's a blockbuster, they're a guarantee. But if they are a horrible human being, to me, that's not somebody I want to support and go see. Like, I haven't gotten to see Broadway shows because there's certain characters in them that are nightmares to their teams. So I think when we start looking at the how we deliver something versus just the result is where we really start to move the culture.
I love that. And I think that's such a moment for L&D right there to take pause and think on, right? Because I think we think we know, and unfortunately it's constantly changing, and we're like, oh, we know, like, this is how we got to do it. And it's like, but is it, and then you have this one-off program, but a one-off experience or whatever that really makes people think and reflect and jumps things further, and it's what you're talking about, just with the how, I think does become so important, and just as important as any metrics or things like that, I mean, in correlation with them, yes, but just how you're doing it and how people are responding to it, I think is powerful there.
Yeah. I'm a firm believer that I really try to always instill that value in anything that I deliver. And in the different phases of my career, I landed in learning and development because it's always been one of my favorite pieces of human resources. I've done almost every role in HR through my career, and was an L&D, left it for a little while to become an HR business partner. I wanted to get the full spectrum. I've done recognition, I've done culture, but I really landed in learning and development because I'm so passionate about it. When any part, though, of my HR career, I used to really try to work with leaders and say, feedback, never confrontational. Even when you're terming someone, it could be a very positive experience because that person, if the relationship is there, that person should realize, you're doing me a favor, right? I'm not successful here. So the more I could work with leaders on leadership is not a task. There's not different tasks within being a leader. It's a whole holistic experience for that colleague. And the more we can look at leadership as that, and less about I have to shift my brain and now do this, or I have to shift my brain and now go do that. All of that is part of day in, day out leadership.
I love that. And I think that's so beautiful. And I think that's could be a thing people ask themselves, can I be a leader or not? Can I do that? Can I shift from doing that to not doing that?
I wish every leader, to me, that's one of my best favorite interview questions. Tell me why you want to be a leader, and really see if there's not a textbook, AI answer to that, right? You could see that.
Yeah.
If you're not feeling it here, then you're in the leadership game for the wrong reason.
Yeah.
A person that reports to you, you're responsible for, one, their career and their development. And it comes with a lot of stuff. How how a person shows up every day, and what affects them in their personal lives and what affects them at work. And so you navigate, I think, a lot as a leader. But ultimately, you are responsible for their growth and helping them get to. So I think my other catchphrase is, I always want to leave people better than I found them. I know that sounds odd, but I mean that in a very positive way. I always want to have someone leave a class feeling inspired that they could go do more. And it doesn't mean working harder, and it doesn't mean doing more in a sense of responsibility. It means having a more impactful moment with their team, or them believing inside that they can be the best leader they could be. So I think that's part of leadership, that you're going to have an impact on someone's life.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that. Stephen, earlier you mentioned soft skills. How do you measure the effectiveness of a soft skills? Jumping back into kind of this skills question, there's been a shift from, soft skills to what many are calling power skills or more durable skills, things like judgment, discernment, decision-making, adaptability. How are you thinking about that in terms of skills development in the moment, especially with AI?
I think discernment is one of the most important leadership skills a leader has to possess. And discernment can mean many different things. I tend to use the word decision making and habits, tiny habits, because when we think of our lives, how many decisions do you make before you even out of bed? That will have an effect on your day. So a leader, when a leader is, and it's very easy for all of us, right, to get caught up in the pace, and we're making all of these decisions that we might not be thinking about. How do they all ladder up to being a very discerning leader in a sense of how you're spending your time, how you just responded to that person? Are you aware of your triggers that might have an impact on how you're delivering a message? So that soft skills, it's funny. Soft skills has been in the industry for so long, versus like a hard skill, which is sort of technical. Like I know how to do Excel. That's a hard skill. So, um, but I do think that those are some of the most important pieces now of a leader truly understanding their approach to their decision making and how they all do they eventually become habits. And if we're not self-aware, I think that's where we start to really, so discernment only happens if you're self-aware. I'm feeling this, so I'm going to take a beat before I respond. Or this is my sweet spot. I love this, so I'm going to go forward, right? And it's also being self-aware to say, I love this, so I'm going to spend more time here at the expense of that.
Yeah, as you were describing that, I'm like, yeah, it's like almost like hyper self-awareness, in every single moment that you're on, and that's not an easy thing to necessarily do. I mean, I think we're all always working on being better at it, right?
Leaders truly role modeling. I think we are at, I've always said a leader could never ask their team to do something they're not doing themselves or role modeling themselves. That is important. I think it's even more important today, though, because everyone is watching each other in different ways. And I think the connectivity is really based on that. So to me, leadership continues to evolve where a leader really does, they don't have to be great at everything, but they do have to role model what they're expecting of their teams.
Yeah, I mean, as a mom, that's like the biggest thing I think about, like day in, day out. It's like, hey, I can't just sit here and tell them what to do day in and day out. Like, I hated that as a child. So, like, how do we adapt that? And it's like, okay, you have to just kind of show them, And so but I think that's true for any like, teaching environment. It's really important. So I really like that. How are you balancing kind of like building human capabilities or teaching things like discernment alongside maybe, obviously like the role-based skill sets that folks need?
Role-based skill sets are, in my opinion, the role of the person's people leader in a sense. And then leadership skill sets to me are pretty universal. And that's where the standard comes in. So if we have one language of what it means to be a leader and the behaviors tied to leadership and then the skills that deliver those behaviors, it doesn't matter if you're in accounting or leading a store. That's what it means to be a leader. The role specific skill sets are really the responsibility of your people leader or a peer. So if you're starting as, let's say, a selling manager in a store, would their people leader know every nuance? Probably not at this point, because they're much more up here looking at strategy and the total picture. So giving that person a like role peer to teach them the ins and outs of those systemic skills and compliance skills and legal things like that, or setting them up with a very strong onboarding program to meet the subject matter experts in the company. And I think that's been also a shift of learning and development where in my personal career in learning and development, I might have spent more of my time partnering with subject matter experts outside of HR to teach someone those skills versus spending my time developing a leadership standard across, and then focusing on where I'm a subject matter expert. And I think that's also been a shift to learning and development.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you do any kind of like mentorship programs? Like I know that's been, a thing that a lot of organizations, I know you talked about like the peer-to-peer interaction there, but we've heard a lot of folks talking about like how they're implementing mentorship programs to do exactly like what you were just talking about.
I think mentorship programs have different, they seem to appear and go away also, because it's how do you make it meaningful? So I think we're always looking at what is the right type of mentorship program to be impactful for people that people want to be part of and people are seeking. So I think there's been different mentorship programs where it was very skill based or it was assigned. And now so what the future of mentorship programs I think continues to evolve so that it is the most meaningful piece of your culture and to the people involved in them.
Absolutely, because it literally has to be authentic for it to work. Like it can't be this forced thing, and then it's defeats the whole purpose of it. Takes the literal definition of mentorship out of it.
Right, right.
Stephen, a little bit earlier we were talking about metrics and things like that, but what when you're looking at a program, I know we don't like to use that word, but for the sake of this, a program per se, what signals carry the most weight with your stakeholders that you want to show have, a program has driven business impact?
First, I think it's not creating anything in a vacuum, so that we are in talent development not directly aligned with what the company's strategies are and how to drive those. So, because it's always going to be, how will this develop our leaders and have a business impact? So I think it's partnering with senior leadership in understanding what our company strategy is, what our culture, what our 5-year plan is, let's say, and then how does talent development best support? And that's also, I think, where we've had a shift. So in my different talent development years, where I might have been pulled in to support a particular strategy of a company in a department, like marketing or let's say a buying product knowledge program. Now, learning development or HR in general is really seen as a business partner. And companies that have brought HR along to actually be a business partner and not an expense department, that's been one of the negative connotations with HR in the past, when we used to be, let's say, called personnel back in the day, right? We weren't part of the business. We were an expense center. We now, I think, are meshed with the business, and very strong learning and development companies that really bring HR and learning and development as not responsible for talent development, because that's always going to be the leader, but has the surround to give you the tools. I think that's the difference. So it really is a partnership. And it's funny, I just went to a seminar. It was an AI seminar, and how AI is part of HR or talent development, and how companies that are really embracing AI are making that part of talent development, which is really interesting. So I think we are going to continue to see how the learning and development space is truly woven into the business, and not just by developing skill developmental programs, or developmental sessions, but also how we're helping people work smarter.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you brought up AI. Is AI part of your learning strategy today?
AI has become almost a relationship, in a sense of using it or leveraging it as a tool to never create something, in a sense, for me, but to be a sounding board. to help me with organizing thoughts and then ensuring I have a learning principle tied to it. So I think sometimes learning and development can be heavily theory. And I know I've been guilty of that. So setting the parameters with AI and saying, don't sugarcoat this, don't compliment me, because it will. It's very positive based. And if you're not self-aware or discerning, you could put forth something that people are like, you way missed the mark on this. Don't rely on AI. You can't. I've seen, the fear of it replacing certain roles, I think, is real. The fear of it replacing all roles, not so much. It's always going to need a human. And it's going to need so to me, it's like a tennis player. It's making me better because it does challenge me by setting in the right parameters. And it will help me put forth a product that isn't skewing blah, blah, blah theory. So yeah, so I think it's been a great partner. And I think more companies are going to leverage it for productivity and taking away a lot of, but you have to really want to embrace it. And I think depending on the generation you're from, there's a learning curve and a fear that's there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I feel like for certain generations, we need to, encourage and showcase how to use it. And then for other generations, we need to be like, don't lean so into it. And like you need to like focus on like building these capabilities. And I love you kind of talked about how, you personally have self-awareness, so you use that almost as a guardrail when you're using AI. Do you have any other types of like guardrails or design principles that you use when telling people how to use AI or suggesting people use AI in the company?
Yeah, my favorite question: what am I missing? When I ask them what am I missing, it tends to change the answers, and it will give me something that I may not have received before. So that's one question I use all the time. I think putting in to it what you are looking for. So today, as an example, I had one of my colleagues ask me a question about measurement, and if I was looking at skills for a session I'm about to lead, in what does it look like if a leader is at the beginner phase of this, intermediate, or expert? And I thought that was a great question. And I was quickly able to say, you're a talent performance expert, and create 3 categories and it was able to bring that back to me as like a starting point, and then I can nuance it based on our culture. So, putting in what you are looking for them to really be what you want it to be an expert in, but then not being that copy and paste done person. It does take some discernment to really ensure, and I think that's the piece of AI that can be very scary and can be really beneficial, because the more you start to use it, and the more you put in where you're limited in, the more it does get to know you a bit. So I think those are my guardrails I've been putting towards it, to know some of my weak spots, but also know that it can't be a replacement for my weak spot.
Right. Right. And to learn from it, it's in and of itself, just using it, I feel like can help you become more self-aware. I think it can also help you become less self-aware. So it's definitely a balancing act.
Yes, that is the piece of it. So I think questions like that, tell me what I might be missing, or where did I miss the mark? I think when you set it up to give you very direct feedback, I'll give you another example. I put in a session that I wrote, and I asked it to do timing for me. And then it was able to sort of tell me right there, saying I was too heavy in concept and not so So it was, so again, I didn't even ask it that, but because it's been this partnership of helping to build this particular curriculum, it was able to push back when I wasn't asking for pushback. So I think it's a consistency thing.
As you look to the next few years, what do you believe L&D and HR leaders need to unlearn, and what do they need to double down on?
As much as we love to do people leaders work for them, we are not having the conversations about feedback. We are not having the conversations about dress code. We are not having those conversations with your teams that you don't want to have. So the role, I think, of HR has shifted to really being strategic and supporting the strategies of the company, and less about pieces the people leader is not comfortable doing.
I love that. I think that's so important. And that gets back to what we were talking about at the beginning too, where people are like, I need a training for this. It's like, you don't necessarily need a training for that. You have to have a hard conversation about that, or look to yourself and something that you're teaching or some policy you're implementing is not landing. We got to figure out why. So that's awesome. I love that. And what do you think that folks need to double down on?
The way things are changing so rapidly right now, I believe any human being at this point has to look at the standard today is not going to be the standard tomorrow, and that's okay. That it's not about working harder, and it's not about doing more, let's say. It's being comfortable with, you're probably never going to reach that point to sit back and say, I'm there. I've achieved excellence, or I've achieved the standard, because it's always going to be a moving target. And I think if we're okay with that, then we possess as humans a curiosity to always want to learn. So I know I can be long-winded because I have to get to my point in my own head. I would double down on curiosity as a human being at this point, and continuing to always want to learn, and not be so focused on, once I achieve that standard, it's not going to move. It's always going to move. And we're okay with that.
I think that's so beautiful. The piece there that I just want to pull out too is that, and that's okay piece, right? Where it's like making sure that you're really okay with that. Like where it's like, so making sure that you're okay with that and knowing what that means, and knowing that, I also think there's a little bit of like optimization culture maxing happening right now, where it's like, do this routine, and do this routine, and like get up and do all these like micro learnings, and like, so you can be better and better and better. And it's like, that's not what you're saying, right? Like you're saying, like, always be curious doesn't mean doing that. It means just like knowing that you're never going to be like this optimal, perfect thing. But just to continue to stay curious and keep questioning things and keep learning and keep evolving and being okay with that. I think that, like you said, I think that's a good human thing, not just in this space that like all humans could take right now.
Yeah.
Okay, Stephen, I have one more question to close.
Okay.
What's one lesson that you've learned as an L&D HR leader that you wish you'd known earlier in your career?
So one, I have to be just as comfortable being the learner as I do the facilitator. And that's a bit of an ego thing. And sometimes it's very hard for me to be in the participant seat. And I think the most valuable lesson I have learned was what I was sharing before, in really embracing, not from a optics point of view to embrace AI or other modern learning, but to really feel that I have to step into where I'm uncomfortable to continue to be a credible learning and development person. And I think that lesson has been no more apparent than this last year.
That's awesome. And a good one. I think it's something you have to remind yourself constantly. Like it's, a well referenced thing, but the quote, do something every day that scares you, as humans go, we don't want to do that. And so like we just naturally like resist that. And so it is something I think that you do have to remind yourself, and something that I try and that I was not, I feel like when you're younger too, though, it's like, just like get through this, check the boxes, make sure you're doing it really well, blah, 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 blah. And it doesn't have to be so finite with all of those answers. They can be more open-ended. So I think that's a great way to end this episode, Stephen. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure. This was great.
It was awesome having you here. And thank you so much to our listeners for tuning in to another episode of NovoEDTalks.